Gemma and James primarily, who I'm really proud to say I get to mentor, and I'm getting to know these lovely people. And hence the title of this particular presentation is all about demonstrating dialogue and how we came to be together. You'll see an occasional quote on the slides. That's purely, as you can see with this slide here, is to give you something to think about whilst we're talking. We generally won't talk to specific bullet points, but add value to the content that you already see. So let me tell you a little bit about the agenda. Gemma, if you'd give us the next slide, please, and then we'll move forward from there. So unsurprisingly, there are three of us, and we come in various shapes, sizes and colours. So welcome, and thank you very much for joining us. You can see what our agenda is here. The most important thing, of course, is to find out who everybody is, and for me to have the pleasure of introducing James and Gemma to you. And then we'll go through various contents that we feel is important in our mentoring relationships. We're imagining that you've got other questions and other ideas, and indeed comments that you'd like to make time, and I'll do my best to integrate them as we go through. So without further ado, let me pass you on so you can meet Gemma.
Okay, hi guys. Yep, I'm Gemma. I've been working with Sheilina since April, so the front end of this year. So my story is I have spent the majority of my career working for a research funder. So I spent 14 years at UKRI, which was a fantastic 14 years because they are very committed to learning and development and training for their employees. So throughout my time there, I managed to secure my Prince 2 practitioner, my Agile practitioner, and my program management qualifications. And so around the back end of last year, I decided to kind of make that move and leave that organization and take advantage of an opportunity that came to me. So I started working for a very small organization, it's a startup organization, and project management was very new to them. And so when I left UKRI, there was a new world in front of me, which was quite daunting to begin with. And so at that point, I thought I should probably seek out some support. And APM is fantastic, it has this fantastic mentoring program. And so that was my first point of call. And I was really lucky to secure a mentor in Sheilina at that point. We have lots in common, not least our passion for the outdoors and travel and music. Mine preferably reggae, I have to say, and lots of things that connects us as people as well as professionals. So yeah, so it's been fab. I'm gonna pass over to James now. And let James tell you a bit about him.
Thanks, Gemma.
No worries.
So I'm James. I've been in the Army 9 years. I've been involved with projects all over the world, in the Americas, Asia, Africa, Middle East and Europe. I've been trusted to lead teams from a very young age. It's enabled me the opportunity to realise that I love the outdoors. I love travelling, I love adventurous sports, something that all three of us have in common. I also love football. I go to the football with my dad at weekends, and it enables me to stay close to my family, which another commonality we all have is family. My favourite music is indie music. My favourite band is Kings of Leon. However, I've recently discovered Chris Stapleton. Over to you, Sheilina.
Thank you, James. I'm still not with you on the indie music thing, but you know, we have to have differences as well as similarities. Sheilina Somani, I am a mother first and foremost, and obviously a project manager, speaker, all that kind of thing. Like everybody else, I absolutely, Jim Downey's just celebrating your Kings of Leon in the chat, James, so just giving a shout out to that one. Thank you, Jim. We like that. We've got collaboration already. Like my team, I also enjoy water sports. The photos are actually my daughter, because clearly I am not doing selfies while kayaking, health and safety and all of that. In terms of music, I have quite an eclectic range of music that I like. So I can buy into reggae. I can just about cope with Kings of Leon, but I like all kinds of other things. And in case you're wondering why we did the introduction this way, it was about what are we unique in terms of the work we do or some of our backgrounds, and for me also working internationally, what are things we have interest in. And I'm sure James and Gemma will go on to talk a little bit about upscaling and updoing camper vans and things we learned about each other as we began not only our individual mentoring journeys and their partnerships with me, but when we came together as a group to conduct this particular webinar. So you'll hear a little bit more about each of us. We haven't added music here, not least of which is for some people that sensory overload. So we've kept it to imagery and conversation rather than trying to overwhelm you all. So this is really the beginning of our conversation as mentor and mentees. And it's really all of these factors. And as we sat and put together this slide deck together, we talked about some of the things that you've already heard Gemma and James mention in terms of exploring what a mentor-mentor relationship might bring, our independent and mutual love of travel, both as solo travelers and with family, friends, and so on. Our own self-awareness, and you heard Gemma start off to talk about, actually, I looked at it and went, it's a different world. I think I need some help. So the self-awareness that says, actually, I need to put more effort in, I need another source, and to be humble enough to ask for help. And equally, to be able to share ideas and suggestions. Mentoring isn't one way. We learn from each other all the time. One of the many things that I appreciate about both James and Gemma is their honesty. They are not afraid of challenging if I come up with an option or a suggestion and saying, well, no, I don't think so, that's not for me. And then we have to unpack some of the reasons and rationale why something may or may not suit them. The most important thing about our mentoring relationships, individually and together, is about priorities, which is why it's highlighted in red on this slide. As their mentor, I'm very much responsive to their priorities. And as you all know, working in projects and life in general, they can change hour to hour, day to day, week to week, and so on. So this was the group that we built up of different commonalities that we found we had such parallels and consistency in. But what it centers on is that central point, which is all about trust. They know that whilst we're working together on this particular webinar, our individual relationships remain private to them as individuals, with me as the catalyst. So that's part of that trust of knowing that they can talk about absolutely anything, work or personal, and know that it's a safe space. So you may be thinking to yourself, I don't need a mentor. I've always loved having a mentor, and it's a real privilege to be there now. But let's talk a little bit about what the objectives were and why you seek mentoring. So James, what were your initial objectives? And Gemma, I'll come on to you in a second, in terms of what you looked for.
So my initial thought to seek mentoring was because I'm leaving the military and I'm studying for APM. So I needed someone I could speak to outside of my sector to be able to put into a different sort of vocabulary. And I also wanted someone that I could speak to and go through the studying that I was doing. So when I was seeking a mentor, I wanted someone who had been in a few sectors that I was looking into, and someone who had a lot of experience in project management. But the most important thing for me was actually in the little bio that Sheilina had. And what it showed is it showed the stuff that she was interested in. Because I guess that, you know, you could have all the project management in the world, but we want to be speaking to real people. And it was good to have things in common so that we know that we're going to be able to, that we get on. So that was one of the things that actually stood out to me.
Thank you, James. Gemma?
For me, obviously the things that I've mentioned previously, it was a whole new environment, a whole new set of challenges, new drivers for people trying to understand and work with a whole different set of people and objectives. There was that, but then on a personal level for me, I definitely sought someone of colour, someone that would have an experience of being within the workplace that I could relate to, and they could relate to me in that sense. When looking around within the APM website, there are obviously lots of people and lots of skills available that would be of help. But it was definitely, I was looking at a personal level. So I set out with kind of 3 priorities that I was looking for. So firstly, I was looking for somebody who had a wealth of experience. Next, I was looking for somebody of color, and next was a woman. And I was I don't suggest that you pick your mentor based off of those 3 things, because you know the likelihood is potentially for some groups that it would be very difficult to find a mentor that would speak to all of those 3. I was very fortunate that I found you, Sheilina, and what it means is it's far easier for us to have a conversation and to get to the crux of the matter, because at times there are conversations that we have that don't involve words. It can just be a look and there is an understanding, and that's super helpful, because there's an education piece that comes at the front end that we don't have to have.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point as well. Thank you both. And for those of you who may not be familiar, or indeed are not people of colour, there are whole layers to conversations and interactions that are very different as women, as people of colour. But equally, from James's perspective, I've never been a white male. So one of the things I asked him when we were first talking about expectations was, you do know that I'm female and of colour, don't you? And how does that affect your thinking, and what else do we do, and what else do we need to think about? But as Gemma rightly said, you know, there are those who are non-binary or indeed fluid and so on, and that's much more difficult to find that commonality with a mentor, particularly when some people choose to be more discreet, whereas others are more overt. So I think there are certain personal aspects that are not necessarily visible or not necessarily in somebody's bio. But as James rightly said, it was quite nice to know that on the initial conversation, if nothing else, we had some social stuff that we had in common, so that there was already an initial conversation. And I think in terms of expectations, I kind of astonished both of you when we individually started to chat. And I can remember, even though it was back in April, Gemma saying, yeah, wasn't expecting this blunt a conversation, because we started to talk. Go on, the laughter reminds you of something, so go ahead, Gemma.
No, I mean, we often have those kind of conversations where I love how open our conversations are, and you are very open to being challenged, because oftentimes there are things that we don't agree with, but yeah, that helps to kind of to enrich the conversations that we have, because it means we dig deeper, because we then try and understand each other's perspective and viewpoints, and we can come to a common understanding or a common way forward. So yeah, it does make me laugh, because it was a shock, but it was a welcome shock.
Yeah, I do forthright quite well, so that's always interesting. But James, I think it's also, you're saying that you're studying for your APM. You just recently did your PMQ, didn't you?
Yes, I did, yeah.
Yeah, so congratulations. That, strategic finance, and what was the other one you did?
Management risk practitioner.
There you go. I'm glad you remembered. You see, I may be a mentor, but I'm not perfect and I don't remember everything. But congratulations on all of those. And I think one of the things I'd point out from my perspective as a mentor is my expectations of you, each of you, were to be forthright and straightforward and genuine about where you had challenges, where you were comfortable, and how you did assure that. Jim, thank you for the positive comment on James. We're very proud of him too. So we talked about that a lot, and we talked about, so what will you be doing as part of the mentoring relationship? And I think that's one of the challenges that people have. And when we're talking about expectations, often people look towards the mentor and say, well, how are you going to help me? Whereas I challenged each of you to say, well, actually, where do you think you want help or need help? And Gemma, as you've mentioned, perceptions are a lot of it. And James, you were very honest about saying, look, I'm really good. I lead teams. I've worked internationally, but I don't know much about Civvy Street. So how do we navigate that? And having those honest conversations about where the gaps might be and how we might navigate them was incredibly helpful. And I think the next thing to move on to, and James, you started to talk about this already in terms of finding a mentor and what you looked for. And Gemma, you and I obviously have multiple points. And just in terms of what I would like to explore with you is what was your concerns? So James, when you were first saying, gosh, I'm going to look for a mentor, and you went to the APM Mentoring website, what were your concerns on that?
I wouldn't say concerns, just what I thought it'd be. I thought it'd be very scheduled. I thought it'd be very formal. Even though I looked for someone who had a similar background and similar interest, I wasn't sure if there would be an instant connection. And I guess one of my concerns would be trying to explain to my mentor my experiences and my reasons for my way of thinking, and they wouldn't understand. But it actually wasn't a problem. Sheilina did understand very well and was able to put what I'd been doing into a vocabulary that's used outside of the army, because obviously, as we know, every sector has its own vocabulary. But it was a way of making that a sort of a global understanding.
Yeah, thank you, James. Gemma, anything you want to add to that?
My concerns. I know I didn't really go into it with many concerns, other than, you know, that we would meet and we wouldn't click, it wouldn't quite work, and then, you know, it's my first kind of experience of mentoring of this kind, outside of the organizations that I've worked in. So it was that I wouldn't have anywhere else to go. I suppose I put a lot of weight on the fact that we are connected through APM potentially. So it's good that it worked, because because
well, we wouldn't be here.
Well, yes, one, we wouldn't be here, but had it not worked, maybe I would have rethought my top 3 priorities potentially. Yeah. Interesting.
So from my perspective, and it actually links to a question that Alan's put in the chat, and just for those of you who haven't seen it, Alan was talking about hints and tips for directing initial mentoring conversations. And I think for me, one of my concerns is quite often I'll get people requesting a mentor, and what they want is, how do I pass the chartership exam? And I'm an assessor for chartership, and I do not do any mentoring or coaching for chartership, because for me that's a conflict of interest. So what I do then is I will say to people, all I will do is reiterate the guidance that's already published by APM, and that helps set that parameter. But as Alan's rightly said, a lot of people will say, well, I just want a high-paid project management job. Honestly, those aren't the kind of people I want to interview to be a mentor with me and mentee with me, because what I'm looking for is people that are interested in developing themselves personally and professionally. I'm interested in people who have some real understanding of what it is they want mentoring upon, and some idea of which direction they want to go in. I have talked to people who are looking for new opportunities and new roles, but ultimately, as we all know, mentoring is a volunteering role. So you have to be very careful about investing your time appropriately. So for example, when I first spoke to Gemma, if all she'd done was talk to me about the difficulties of being a female in the workplace, we would have had very little to talk about. Similarly, James, if the first thing you'd done is to say, well, who can you put me in touch with to get in touch with a company and make that door open for me, then again, I would be saying, well, what are you bringing to the mentoring relationship? So the way that I direct initial conversations, and in fact, I have another mentee request sitting in my inbox at the moment, is I send them some questions, which I'll copy and paste into the chat shortly when Gemma and James are talking. But I send them a list of questions and ask them, in talking to me about mentorship, please answer the following questions. And then from that, I will always have the initial conversation and say, and as Fatima says, it is a two-way process. Have the initial conversation. What are you looking for from me? Do I think I can help provide that? Or actually, is there a conflict of interest, as I mentioned, for example, with chartership? So my view is always that initial conversation, and James and Gemma, you may remember this, I'll say to them, you'll find I'm very direct and I'm very forthright. So you need to think about how you take feedback, and we talk about feedback. But equally, the other thing that I reinforce every time I have a conversation is that the mentoring relationship is driven by the mentee, not the mentor. It is not a coaching situation. So they tell me what they need, and they have to be self-starters. So if I have a mentee, and I did have that in the past, where they were continually late or forgetting we had a session, eventually I sent a formal email saying, I'm really sorry, but you're showing a lack of commitment. And despite our conversations, that hasn't changed. So I'm closing the mentoring relationship. So I think there's some objective setting around expectations, which is why it's on the slide here, what people are actually looking for, what they think they're going to gain from mentoring, but also from the mentor's perspective, do I genuinely think I can help you? So, for example, I had somebody talking to me about getting into a particular industry that I actually hadn't had much exposure to. And I said, if that's your criteria, then actually I don't meet that. How about talking to, and I redirected them to a couple of other mentors on the APM website. So I just want to go back. Sharon made a really useful comment about it should be about self-development and motivation. Completely agree, Sharon. And what's interesting is that goes from both personal and professional aspects. And obviously, I'm not going to ask Jem or James to talk about personal aspects. It's a professional discussion in this webinar. But I've been privileged that they have talked to me about different dynamics and dimensions to their world. And one of the things that I would stress to all of you who've joined us today is mentoring is very much a privilege where your mentee allows you into their world to support, to facilitate, to even just engage some thinking or some ideas and widen the perspectives available. So I'm just going to go to Ursula's comment briefly, Gemma and James, before we go through. Ursula was talking about getting involved in internal and external projects, and that actually goes well with some of the things that, James, you've been doing with your military stuff that you can't necessarily talk a lot about, but working with internal teams and collaborating with others and internationally. Gemma, in a research environment, people who are educated, familiar, unfamiliar, and all of those dynamics. So what you're hearing, and I hope you're noticing, is that the dynamics between us are just really open and relaxed. So what are some of the benefits? You've heard us started to talk about those already. Gemma, anything in particular that you'd like to draw attention to? And then I'll come back to you, James.
I mean, yeah, there's so many benefits. I've experienced so many benefits working with you. I think one of the standout things, and I'm not sure whether the slide really covers it, yeah, growth, I suppose, is a better appreciation of my interactions within the work environment. So certainly in regards to language that is used and fostering different ways to interact and being just more considerate of how I tend to communicate with individuals. Certainly, you know, I've come from an environment that I've worked in for 14 years, and the language is the same, it's consistent, and it's been consistent for 14 years, and it's worked. And so when you're then going into an entirely different environment and it's not quite hitting, you start to question, is this me? And potentially it is, but it's not what you're intending to do. It's just the way in which you're voicing it. So that's definitely been a growth factor in my regards. I think that the networking aspect has been fantastic. Sheilina, you've been incredible when it comes to kind of broadening our network of people and individuals, and from different industries, and just opening our minds to the potential that's out there, and the potential that I have. I hope that it's the same for James. That's been fantastic. But there are just so many pluses that we could potentially be here all day. So I'm going to hand over to James.
Yes, Sarah will tell us off if we're more than an hour, so we need to stay
Okay.
within that. James, just before I come to you, first of all, thank you, Gemma. And I think for me, one of the nice things was when APM said to me, how about doing a webinar on mentoring? And I went, actually, I want to bring 2 of my mentees into this. And I think for me, one of the real benefits of having both of you on this particular webinar as well is you both come with experience, lived experience as individuals and as professionals, and yet still we're able to go, actually, I could do with another perspective on this. And Jim's rightly mentioned is about being a better listener. I completely agree, Jim. One of the real disciplines of being a good mentor is being able to listen without waiting to speak. So it's that thing of actually absorbing what is being said and then responding to that. So that's an interesting point too.
As mentee as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's super helpful in that regard, because conversation is a two-way street, and it's a lot of the discussions we have are exploratory, right? So there is a lot of give and take, and certainly as a mentee, listening, hearing, going away and reflecting, that's huge, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. James, over to you. Your thoughts on this particular topic?
So just carrying on with the listening part, I've definitely doubled down on my listening. I know it sounds strange, but you do have to be a good listener to be a mentee. But also a benefit of mentoring is Sheilina introduced me to Simon Sinek, and he speaks about being a good listener, and how he become a really good listener professionally, but he wasn't a good listener in his personal life. And like Gemma said, with her listening, she then reflects on it after. And I actually noticed the same thing, that I was really, really practicing my listening with Sheilina, and hadn't really thought about my listening in my workplace. But I realised I wasn't so good at listening personally at home, and I've now become better at listening. So that is actually a thing.
Staying married. Yes.
Confidence. I've become a lot more confident in my workplace, and also a lot more confident when looking for new roles. And I went into the APM exam so much more confident just by listening to Sheilina's way of thinking. I remember just before the exam thinking, I remember so much of it, but there's also bits that I can't remember, and I really overthought about the bits that I can't remember, where Sheilina is kind of glass half full, and she's like, yeah, but think of all the things that you are good at and all the things you do remember. And that really helped me with confidence.
Cool, thank you. I think the other thing is I learned so much from you as well, because there are times that I'll say something that for me is standard and I know what I'm talking about, and then you'll get me looking at it from a completely different perspective. Leanne's just made a useful comment to say that she realizes that she's actually got a mentee who needs a coaching relationship and she can redirect. We've had a couple of other questions, but I'm going to come back to them, and I've just put a note in the chat to say that I have put them in, and we'll pick up. I think one of the words I'd like to come back to on this slide is the word evolve at the top. And James, you talked about this a little bit when you said about, I thought it would be more structured, more formal. For me, the mentoring relationship is always about evolving, and actually for both of us and in each relationship, the two parties to evolve their understanding of one another, of the dynamics of what's going on, but also even to how we communicate and why we communicate in the way we do. So James, I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit more about evolving, and then Gemma, I'll come back to you as well.
With evolving, I set out with a success criteria of, I want to meet somebody who I can actually talk about project management to kind of help me remember, so for my exam. But it evolved into so much more than that, where I was obviously then looking for where I'm going to go to next. But now that I'm in a process of moving to my new company, I definitely want to carry on our relationship, because it's become so much more than that. And yeah, I'd like to continue that.
Oh, thank you. Gemma?
Evolving. I think yeah. So this year has been, the whole process, the whole year has been a year of evolving, really, for me professionally, but also personally connected to my professional environment. And I think the conversations that we have really, they surpass that of just about kind of project management, professional practice and application. It's more about myself in a world of in a professional world. So I think it's this similar to James, in that I came into our relationship with this idea that actually there were some challenges that I was facing within my professional work environment, and they were related specifically to project management, when actually there was a whole host of things that were at play. And so, yeah, so my thinking around that has certainly evolved massively.
Cool, that's really interesting. I just want to feed back to you both, because Gemma, I'm conscious that you can't see chat because you're doing the slides. Just Avatar Baines, I'm hoping I've pronounced your name correctly. The comment is, this has really helped me understand the separation with mentoring and coaching and cleared the slightly blurred lines in my mind. And then they then go on to say that they do a combination of structured coaching, but are now recognizing more mentoring. So thanks to both of you, James and Gemma, to joining this conversation, because that's helping it illuminate things for others as well. Simon Sinek was the person that James mentioned, and I put that in a note. Thank you for asking, Victoria. Thank you. So in terms of why being a mentor, and I'm just going to speak briefly about this, the quote is there for you all to read. For me, it's such a privilege. There is a time commitment. There is a need to actually, from my perspective, if you're mentoring, you have to care about the person. And Gemma talked about shared values and so on. And James and I found very quickly, despite our different backgrounds and indeed genders and mentalities and everything else, we had so many values in common, and you saw me talk to those when we summarized that circle of trust and all of the qualities that we share. But as a mentor, you've got to be prepared to take the whole person. So when I'm talking about evolving and adapting, it's about recognizing where that person is in their emotional well-being as well as their personal and professional journey. We've talked a bit about considerations and concerns already, but I believe the role of the mentor is to challenge and to expand the horizons, the perceptions, the types of people that you might listen to in podcasts, or indeed the types of pursuits you may have, both personally as well as in the workplace. I also think it's really important as a mentor to reinforce the capabilities your mentees have. So you heard James talk about the difference in speak, and all of us know from a project management point of view, we're a world of acronyms and phrases and vocabulary that we all prefer. But actually, it was very quick for me when James told me a little bit about what he did, for me to say, well, actually, when you get into preparing for your PMQ, you'll see it under that topic, or you'll see that under that topic. So being able to draw lines and parallels between their lived experience and what theory said, for me, is a primary part, not only of being a decent mentor, but also being an effective project manager, because with stakeholders, we're interacting all the time and we want to engage them and get the buy-in to continue. So I think, you know, and again, the quote sums it up. We acknowledge our interdependencies and we appreciate one another an awful lot. So that's something that I'm really proud to share that time with each of you. And for those of you who are wondering how we manage it, typically what we do is we schedule a time together. If that changes for somebody, we try and give each other as much notice as possible. Equally, there are emergencies. We have things called phones and WhatsApp, so we can message one another. Equally, if something urgent comes up and there's a sense of crisis for either of my mentees, then it's a case of just message me, and as soon as I'm free, we'll catch up and move on. Equally, earlier in the summer, I had something of a crisis where my mother had an accident and I had to fly out to Vancouver. and I could just honestly say to my mentees and say, look guys, I'm going to be a little less available. And in fact, James and I talked whilst I was in Vancouver. We scheduled time zones and so on. And actually, it was really nice that they cared as much about what was going on for me as I do about them. So again, there's that mutuality of not just respect and professionalism, but genuine care and interest. So as a mentor, there's some top tips. As I've said, I'm not going to talk through each slide. That's why we wrote them for you. But it is very much a partnership, and that means give and take. The mentee needs to respect that the mentor is offering their time free of charge. So respect that and be aware that that is time that, in my case, because I'm self-employed, if I'm spending time with my mentees, I'm not earning, but I am gaining. I'm gaining a huge amount personally from the investment, from the conversations, from the dynamics, the dimensions, all of that kind of thing. I've talked a little bit about the bottom section about balancing boundaries, and I think it depends on where you end up mentoring with somebody. Sometimes if there's somebody who's, and forgive the expression, very needy, and every time they ask a question, as a mentor, you kind of feel a bit like, could you just learn how to use Google, or other providers are available. Whereas if you get a mentee, and as I have here with James and Gemma, who both will say, actually, I've got a question about this, or I looked this up and I could do with clarification on that, that really helps. But it is about creating boundaries. And if somebody is being very needy and not actually doing their own research, their own exploration, then as a mentor, I am going to push back and say, have you looked at this? Have you looked at that? I'll happily provide resources. And you'll see Sarah's put a note up to say that we're sharing slides. We're also sharing a list of podcasts and webinars and other items that articles that we found interesting, that may be beneficial to you as well. Gemma, I've seen your question. Again, I hope I've pronounced your name correctly. We'll come back to your question towards the end, but thank you. So, James and Gemma, over to you. Who'd like to start us off?
Okay, so I just want to let you know the screen's frozen for me, so hopefully I'm on the right slide. And it's know your success criteria. Is that right, Sheilina?
Yeah, so what you're looking at, and I'll just go through it. This is what your top tips were. So James, you don't have to remember what's on the slide because you wrote it, and you've already talked about good listening. Anything else you want to add in terms of tips for being a mentee?
It's fine. I'll go through them. I've already prepared for this, so I wrote down the order of the slides. You should be proud.
Cool. Go ahead.
So, first, success criteria. So obviously you need to go in. You need to know what you want from the relationship at first. But every time you meet, you need to know exactly what you want to get out of that meeting. Like Sheilina says, it's a two-way thing, but also the mentee kind of drives the conversation. So definitely know what you want to achieve from each conversation, and pre-plan that. Give them a heads up before you arrive there. Be open-minded. Look outside your sector. That way you'll get a non-biased point of view. There's going to be no gain in it for you, no gain in it for the mentor either professionally. Like we've already said, be a good listener, but also absorb diverse thoughts. Different sectors, different backgrounds, they'll all have different thoughts, new ideas. And clearly with being a good listener, you're going to make the most of your time. And lastly, I'd say value informal advice from outside your organisation, because that way you know it's going to be honest advice. If it's not inside your organisation, it's clearly going to be honest advice, because like I said, there's no gain otherwise, except personally as an achievement, feeling good about the whole situation. Over to you, Gemma.
Thank you. I'm likely to echo most of the things you've said, James. I think what I would like to stress is, it sounds like that often the kind of mentor-mentee relationship can be viewed as though, from a mentee perspective, as though your mentor should just be there. And I think there should be much more of an emphasis on the fact that actually your mentor, especially in this setting where it's a free kind of charitable endeavor from your part, Sheilina, So as a mentee, there needs to be a huge appreciation of the fact that your mentor is choosing to be there with you. So there should be a respect that goes back with that, and understanding that if someone is investing that amount of time in me, at the least I can do is come prepared, understanding what it is that I'm trying to achieve from this, and why it is that I am taking that time away from my mentor that could be investing that elsewhere. I also think, you know, we've touched on this previously in the slides before, but being open to very honest feedback, I think that's necessary. Otherwise, why are you there? If you just want to hear positive things, I wouldn't suggest going into a mentor-mentee relationship. But also at the same time, having the confidence and the understanding within your relationship that you can comfortably challenge feedback that comes to you, or challenge in discussions that you have with your mentor. Often that's where your richest kind of breakthroughs come from, when you're really trying to work through the conversations that are being had and the perspectives that are coming out of that.
Yeah, really good comments. I think one of the things we haven't touched on this is the note taking. And Gemma, on your comments on this slide, you talked about actually taking a moment to reflect post session. One of the many things I appreciate about each of you is that you do not only reflect, but then when we meet again, you'll quite often go, last time we talked, we mentioned this, I've gone away and done this, and I now have more questions. So I really like how our relationships continue to build, where you've not only reflected, but you've then acted upon that reflection and again evolved or adapted from that. Sharon, we've seen your question, we'll come back to that as well. The other part I would add to this is you guys have been really easy for me to work with because of your honesty, and also because of your willingness to challenge. And I think it's an opportunity for me to reinforce that when you're the mentor, doesn't mean you know everything. You know stuff because you've been living, growing, working for a while, but you don't necessarily have all the answers, and you don't have to have, but you do honestly say, actually, I'm not sure. And there are times with each of them that I've said, actually, let me just cross-check that. And whilst we're having a chat, we'll both go online and cross-check our references or sources and things like that. So I think that's another thing, is it's not about being perfect. It's about being honest. We're getting close towards the end of the webinar, and I thank you all for joining us. I think what I'd like to do is just summarise our reflections on this first collaborative effort, because it's the first time the three of us have worked together on things. So for me, it's been incredibly straightforward because both of you have had commitment and interest, and also really owned the fact that we were delivering this collaboratively. Gemma, then James, what are your comments on this particular slide?
Our first collaboration as a team, yeah, I mean, it has been great. I think it's helpful that we all came into the process with our values aligned, right? So doing that prep, having those open conversations, and being open to kind of put ourselves into an environment that wasn't necessarily comfortable, in the sense of meeting new people and going on a webinar with 108 people plus. I see this is all very new, but we obviously trust each other to be in that position, so that's really positive.
Yeah, and actually current numbers are at 118, so well done both of you for accepting the challenge. And as your mentor, I'm so thrilled that you were willing to come on and go, yeah, let's lay it out for everybody else and see how we work. James, over to you, please.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with Gemma. And I remember at first, actually, when this idea came up, I thought it was a bit weird to be meeting another mentee.
Yeah.
But I definitely would recommend bringing mentees together if that's a possibility, because it's grown onto a lot more, and I'm sure we'll carry on this relationship. But what it has shown me is for me, inside the army, we're really good at like creating a cult, a sense of belonging and commitment to each other. But creating this team has shown me that actually in the outside world, it's just as welcoming, and I can fit in there as well, which has been really good, and I've really enjoyed our relationship.
Good. I think that's really cool. And you know, because I obviously spoke to both of you about it, but to me, again, another part of good mentoring is to connect mentees that I think would go well together. So for example, when I did have to go off to Canada and I had other things come up subsequently, I was able to say to you both, please stay in touch with one another and help grow it, bounce off each other as well as from me. And I think that's another aspect, is to make sure that, you know, maybe one mentor relationship isn't enough. Maybe you need multiple dynamics to that. The other reflection I'd have in terms of this is, and for those of you who are kindly joining us, one of the things that we're going to do is go through your questions and provide you with further answers if we don't get time in our remaining 9 minutes left, but also to make sure that we added our learning, shared our resources, so that we were giving you more than just the slides. So it's really helpful from that point of view. Elif, thank you so much for your comments. That's really welcome. So this is time to go to you guys, and I've got a few questions that have come up in the chat that I want to pick up. But as Sarah mentioned, we can also open the community. I think what I'd like to do before we do that is, Gemma, if you just move briefly to our last slide, and then we'll put on cameras and things and go to questions. I'd like you all to just please pay attention to the last quote, which hasn't been attributed to anyone, but we can always go further than we think we can if only somebody would just listen and reflect. And that's true for me as a mentor as much as it is for my mentees, in that I hoped to be of help, and only through their honesty and their questioning have I been able to be more helpful than I thought I could be. So I want you to know that we very much appreciate that you've bothered to talk to us in the chat, and that you've made contributions, and that you've made time to share this with us. I would thank you, Michelle. I really liked the quote too. Gemma, I'll invite you to stop sharing the slides, and those of you who are comfortable, feel free to put your cameras on. I'm going to go to the questions from the chat first, but feel free to add other questions to the chat in the meantime. Gemma, James, by all means comment when you're ready. And Baines, I'm delighted, Avtar, that it was helpful. So let's go back to some of the questions that came earlier. Ben had asked about he's keen to offer mentoring to areas of the business at a junior level, but is interested to know what we think the challenges might be of offering mentoring to staff who are within your structure or line management. So my first comment would be, you have to be awfully careful. If you're in a line management situation, you've got to think about the dynamics of reporting lines, performance reporting, HR, and also any potential impact to day-to-day working, where you then might be seen in a higher or different regard to their actual line manager. There's also the dynamic of other people who report to you seeing it as preferential treatment. So look all at that. Gemma, James, anything you'd like to add?
No, other than I just think from a mentee perspective, it's refreshing to be able to have open conversations about the work environment with somebody who doesn't work within that environment. So it's been super beneficial for me. So that's all I would say, really. Okay.
Anything you want to add, James, to that one?
Sorry, no, nothing to add, just exactly what Gemma said, to be honest.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. And there are times that there just isn't more to add. The next question came from, and again, forgive me if I mispronounce anything, Carsten Florian Bruns, which was asking about, how do you know whether a mentor is a good fit if I don't know them or don't disclose much on their mentor page? My first comment would be, have that conversation, and remember, as the mentee, you drive the relationship. If you feel comfortable, tell them that this doesn't seem a good fit for you, and tell them why, so that the mentor can learn. Equally, from the mentor's perspective, there are times, and I spoke to a lovely, lovely individual way back when this mentoring program first began, and she was so on it she literally needed to reflect her own objectives and targets. She didn't need a mentor. She already knew where she was going. And we had about 40 minutes conversation, and that was that. So sometimes it's that. Any other thoughts, James, Gemma, on looking for a mentor? I just want to reinforce Callum's comment before we do that. Don't limit it to a formal relationship. So true. Discrete or specific elements, and ask for help. Absolutely, Callum. James, Gemma, any other thoughts on how to determine whether somebody's a good fit?
Yes. Do you mind if I go first, Gemma?
No, go for it.
Yeah, I think just from this webinar, hopefully all the mentors out there, it'll just enable them to write more in their bio about who they are as a person. Because I just think first things first, everyone's looking for a connection. We all go out and we set out of our goals for professionally because that's why we're here. But naturally, as humans, we've got a sense of belonging and we want to have a connection with people. That's why when you go on holiday and you hear that familiar voice that speaks the same language as you, and straight away you have a connection. And I just think, yeah, I think that's a real bonus. If you can put into your bio your stuff you're into, then someone will, find the personal connection with you as well.
Thank you. That's, yeah, and Fatima's immediately put up to say, well said, James. Thank you, Fatima. Quick typey on the keyboard. Gemma, just before you answer, for those of you who are still here, obviously we would welcome your feedback. Sarah's going to put up a QR code in a moment to ask for your feedback. As you know, we've put time and energy into this, and we'd really like to hear your comments and thoughts as well. So Sarah, feel free to put up the QR code if you'd like to. Gemma, please go ahead in terms of...
Yeah, I wasn't going to add very much to that beautiful statement. What I was going to add is, don't be afraid of having that initial conversation, because, you're not signing any contracts, and the initial conversation is to find out more about each other, right? So at the end of that, you can walk away. You can say, this has been lovely. I don't think it's a right fit, but let's stay in touch. Let's not, however you want to approach it. But yeah, just because you meet someone doesn't mean that you have to engage in a mentor relationship with them.
Cool, thank you very much. Sarah, I'm conscious we're close to the time. And yes, Sarah's just asked the question, which please, if you'd put into the chat, any questions on future topics that you might be interested in to hear from APM, or indeed from the three of us, we'd be happy to do this again. It's been a lot of fun. So yeah, anything else that anyone wants to add? Okay.
Just like to say thank you. It was a really brilliant session, and thank you to all of three.
Fatima, was that you speaking?
Yes, that is me.
Thank you. That's lovely that you chose to open your microphone. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. It's really interesting, and it's really, like I said, it's a two-way relationship, and it only works if you've got that understanding and getting the foundation right.
Yeah, so very true, Fatima. And as you can see, I work with some fab people. So yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
There was one other question that we hadn't picked up, and I appreciate the thanks that are coming up in the chat. Thank you very much for making the time. There was a question about how early in your career you might choose to be a mentor or a mentee. For me, it's not about early in your career. It's about who you are as a person and how you've developed as a person, because there could be somebody sitting next to you in your class, in your office, who could just benefit from your perspective. Gemma, James, I don't know whether there's anything either of you would like to add to that.
No, I would say I have been a mentor previously, and that's literally been based on my experience. So again, I think it's more about how much you as a person want to engage and how much you have to offer, really.
Yeah. If there are any other questions, I'm conscious we're right on time, but Sarah, I don't know whether there's anything that you wanted to add before we close out. I know people have to dash off as well. Thank you all so much. And James and Gemma, thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sheilina. Nothing much from me, just for just a thank you to everyone that's joined us today, and to Sheilina, Gemma and James for taking so much time out to prepare and provide some really great insights on their mentoring experience from being a mentor and a mentee. I think it's been really, really helpful. Take care,
Thank
everyone.
you. Great
Cheers,
job,
bye-bye.
Gemma and James. Thank you.
For the opportunity.